Welcome, everyone, to this webinar hosted here in Nova Scotia. We are the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers, and we are located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship with Mi'kmaq and Maliseet people, first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized Mi'kmaq and Maliseet title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relation between nations. All people in Canada have treaty rights and responsibilities. Those who have settler, arrivant, and refugee origins are challenged to collectively work towards reconciliation with Indigenous peoples and communities, even as we reckon with our profession's role in residential schools and other colonial projects designed to displace, dispossess, and disempower Indigenous peoples. Social workers are also embedded in communities that are grappling with their own roles in the great and necessary labor of reconciliation. As many Nova Scotian fishing communities struggle through this conflict and crisis, worsened by the intersections of a pandemic, economic uncertainty, and racism, we encourage our members to approach this work with a trauma-informed lens, to draw on the resources available to you, and to ground your praxis in your professional values and ethics. My name is Annemie Gavink. I am the professional practice consultant with the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers, and it is my honor to welcome you today to this webinar entitled Mental Health with Elementary Age Students. In this session, we will unpack mental health challenges emerging in elementary age youth. After reviewing startling facts and statistics, we will learn the reasons for this rise, how children manifest their experiences, and the implications on an individual's mental health as they grow older. How we as teachers, counselors, and concerned communities can defeat this trend will also be explored. We will uncover the effectiveness of such ideas as play therapy, relationship building, emotional control, mindfulness, and the effect of information highway on brains still in development. We will leave this session with some practical ideas on how to assist younger individuals and their families to increase their positive mental health. Today's webinar is in collaboration with the Canadian Association of Social Workers, for which we are deeply grateful, in collaboration with us, the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Davina Melanson, who is a behavior intervention teacher at a school in the Annapolis Valley Regional Center for Education. She works with many youth who have a diagnosed mental condition or have simply poor mental health. She has taught mental health courses at both the graduate and undergraduate levels, and has presented on mental health in the Annapolis Valley and with the CCPA or the ICA. She works closely with Schools Plus, psychologists, community services, and is looking always for ways to find the best way to address the concerns of with. A little bit of the housekeeping ahead. We're going to be speaking and listening for approximately 60 minutes, followed by a question and answer period that I will moderate. Please note that all the details you need, like how to access the slide deck and other resources, get your certificate of attendance, and other housekeeping information, is found in the bottom of your screen. All the widgets can be accessed by clicking at the icons at the bottom of your window. You can also resize and move around any of the elements you see on your screen to customize your viewing experience. During the presentation, I encourage you to type in your questions at any time, and I will begin answering them, asking them at the end of the presentation or throughout. There's also a chat box, which some of you have already found, where I see people who have arrived from Saskatchewan and Manitoba and Newfoundland. So welcome everyone from all of Canada's territories and provinces. During the presentation, we'll do our best to answer the questions, or they will all be addressed, or we'll work towards making as many of them answerable at the end of Davina's presentation. With that, I hope you enjoy this time, and I'm really honored to pass it on to our incredible speaker. Take it away, Davina.
Well, this is a new thought for me, a new presentation, a new way to go at presenting. Before I go any further, I want to congratulate each and every one of you. This is an extremely trying time, and demands are being put on our time and our emotional regulation that I can only imagine for some of you. So congratulations. What an amazing group of people you are to be able to get yourself through all of this. But today we are here today to speak about our youth. I specifically wanted to talk about elementary youth because those are the ones that I see most on the rise. However, much of what I am saying is going to be applicable to students, youth, adults, seniors. So feel free to take this information and use it as you will. The key concepts I want to try to cover today, I'm going to take a look at some stats. We're going to talk about some mental health concerns, strategies, and practical approaches that you as social workers can use. And then we're going to wrap it up with some questions. The first question I have, and this is a very different forum for me. I'm used to having a lot of feedback, so forgive me if I stumble. The first question I really want you to ponder is, why do you think we have to take a look at mental health? Well, there's so many reasons why. As we know, there's been an increase in poor mental health, and even an understanding of what mental health is. I myself have gone into many different classrooms to talk about mental health, and everybody looks on mental health as something being wrong with you, something that needs fixing, and they seem to forget that we all have mental health. I am specifically talking about poor mental health today, because even before the pandemic hit, the statistics regarding our elementary youth were staggering. We had youth as young as 5 years old trying to commit suicide. Yes, 5 years old. It's a staggering statistic, and it's very accurate. The most of the mental health concerns came between youth that were between the ages of 9 and 16. And from then, it got a little bit better, but I'm not exactly sure if everything was being reported at that point in time. However, since COVID hit, a recent poll found that over 50% of Canadians reported poor mental health since the pandemic began. 50% of Canadians. Right now, that means 110 of you that are watching this have reported worsening mental health. That is staggering. And what that means for us and what our jobs are becoming is being influenced largely by this. Some of you, I see you're from all over Canada. Some of you are already in the middle of wave 2. I'm in a very lucky place in Nova Scotia. We're very fortunate. But some of you are already feeling the effects of a second wave of COVID. And I can only imagine the mental health statistics that you're facing. And it is staggering. And we do have to keep in mind that even with our mental health, we can have individuals that are diagnosed with mental health and non-diagnosed with their mental health. It's very much a spectrum. It is possible to have your diagnosed mental health challenges and still experience well-being. You could have absolutely no symptoms, but still have your own mental health challenges. And then on the other spectrum, you can have what seems to be symptoms, but no diagnosis. And what we're seeing in our elementary youth is more and more and more. There is no diagnosis, but there is a virtual cornucopia of symptoms coming through this. I take you to this next slide, and I thought this was a funny slide, because here we have a very healthy adult knowing what he's going to say, but when his poor mental health hits with the anxiety, it's destroyed. And everything he had practiced comes out, me Tarzan, you Jane. And what does he say? Damn, because he knows he's messed up. He knows his anxiety is interfered. And in a very, very small way, this is what's happening to a lot of our individuals in elementary school. They know what is right. They know what they have to do, but their poor mental health is causing them to behave in ways that are not socially acceptable. As Anna Meek mentioned, I have been a behavior interventionist, and the biggest thing I found with my young kids is that they all knew what they did wrong, but they didn't have the capacity to stop themselves from doing it. They knew the minute they hit somebody they shouldn't have. They knew the minute they threw the desk they shouldn't have. They knew the minute they bit someone they shouldn't have. But they simply didn't have the capacity to recognize their own strengths and how to get out of this without resorting to this type of behavior. This is the effect that poor mental health is having on our youth. Now, I also am talking about so many different disorders here. And a lot of them you've heard of. I know you've heard of all of these, I should say. Your anxiety disorders, your ADHD, contact, depression, psychosis, bipolar, eating disorders, schizophrenia, and there's a plethora of ones that I haven't even mentioned. But these are real disorders that I am seeing in elementary kids as young as 5 years old. Generally speaking, for example, ADHD is not supposed to be diagnosed until they're 6 or 7. But because of some of the symptoms that are showing up, we are getting kids that are being diagnosed younger and younger. For right or for wrong, they are being diagnosed. And when they are being diagnosed, this also means that they're on the medication for it, which again has its own side effects. So in addition to the poor mental health that they are getting treatment with, they're being affected with many, many, many different types of side effects. Again, this all plays on your poor mental health. So when the question why is answered, this is why, because we have so many different things coming at our kids. And as we know, poor mental health can appear as so many different things. Someone can be extremely passive and non-communicative. Someone can be aggressive. I've heard people say, well, that child has no empathy. Oh, they're just being non-compliant. They're being argumentative. But sometimes it shows up as being fatigued, and they show up as being very, very quiet. However, sometimes, and these are the dangerous ones, there are no symptoms that are caused by so many different things, like peer pressure, learning challenges, anxiety, an excess of anxiety, busy schedules, depressions, information overload. You can read them all. These are all things that can have a negative effect on most of our elementary youth. Guess what? Dr. John Herds of University of Waterloo says that children with mental illnesses or mental challenges or poor mental health have very different needs than adult patients. And that is something that is common sense, but it's not something we often think of. I myself, even when I'm working with my youth, because they're doing things that seem so grown up and so mature, I will make the mistake of talking to them as if they actually understand why they're doing it. The kids don't. They're just becoming overwhelmed with a lot of their poor mental health. The recent collaborative study by the Canadian researchers at Waterloo found that children are at higher risk for self-injury and suicidal ideation than adults. Again, they may not have the full comprehension of what it's doing to them or what harm it can do. The kids can also be much more physically and verbally abusive, and they display much more outwardly aggressive behaviors. And again, in my experience, it's because they have not had the opportunity to practice, the opportunity to learn, or the opportunity to actually discuss why they're acting this way. So, when we take a look at our mental health in younger kids, we do have to take a look at some of these considerations. There is seldom a formal diagnosis, although, as I said, the diagnoses are starting earlier and earlier. And a diagnosis, I don't want to be misquoted here by any means, but a diagnosis is not the end itself. A diagnosis should become the beginning of a process in helping them. A diagnosis helps us figure out where to go. But I remember I had this one youth, he was perseverate on tasks, he would walk on his toes, he would not be able to manage appropriately in social situations, and consequently we were trying to get a diagnosis of Adhd. The teachers I was working with at the time didn't know what to do because he didn't have the diagnosis. What we have to do is, if it looks like a duck and walks like a duck and talks like a duck, treat it like a duck until we hear otherwise. You're not going to do any harm by putting some supports in place if someone looks like an ASD student, someone who has ASD, rather than leaving them to fend for themselves. That's going to cause more harm. Again, the earlier the students are diagnosed or presumed to have a specific diagnosis, the more it does become their identity. I've had so many youth come and see me and say, I have anxiety, as the first thing they say. When that happens, it's a very dangerous situation, because to me that means that everything they do is associated with their anxiety. And although it might be, there are so many great strategies that help them overcome some of the negative aspects of anxiety. Not to mention, anxiety is normal. We all have anxiety. And so I do have to bite my tongue when they come in and say, I have anxiety. I have to bite my tongue instead of saying, yeah, so do I. Because we all have it, but because of the negative connotations associated with such a diagnosis sometimes, they tend to be negative towards themselves. Another fact from mental health challenges is that any disturbances that they do have disrupt whatever situation they're in. If they're in preschool, if they're in daycare, if they're in school settings, if they're with babysitters, if they're at home, their poor mental health can affect how they're reacting and how people are reacting to them, which unfortunately only serves sometimes to reinforce the behavior. Again, behaviors due to poor mental health can often occur in one place, and it becomes a means of coping in those situations. And I have seen that time and time again with extremely young youth, 4 and 5 years old. We kind of think of it as the terrible twos, you don't get something, you cry and scream. But when that starts the behavior at ages 4, 5, and 6, that's when it becomes less socially acceptable, and that's when it becomes a major mental health challenge, because they don't know how else to cope except the one way that's been working for them time and time again. Often, the challenges appear to have no origin, and it's really difficult to determine what might be triggering the response. But I can guarantee that every behavior, every manifestation of poor mental health, there is some kind of an origin. And it kind of becomes our jobs as social workers, educators, counselors, to help the student figure out how to overcome that origin so that they can address their poor mental health challenges in a healthy, more productive way that is conducive to society. Okay, moving on. This is a very different way to present. I am so used to the give and take, so I do apologize if I sound a little bit lost. It's because I keep expecting feedback, and of course I can't get it in this situation. So I totally apologize for that. When we're looking at positive mental health, and negative mental, I want to back up a bit here. Yeah, considerations for challenges okay, we did that. This next slide I thought was really interesting, simply because we often hear the phrase, fake it till you make it. But until you actually see this succeed with students who have poor mental health, it is just a silly phrase. However, statistics have been shown that people who were deemed to be pessimistic had a 20% higher risk of dying over a 30-year period than those who were considered optimistic. And I tried this with one of my classes. I do a lot of mindfulness activities with a lot of my classes that I go into. And one of the things we did is we did the laughing mindfulness exercise. And I'm sure many of you have heard it and many of you have done it. But it was so interesting because when I walked in, it was a Monday morning. And they were all very tired because of the weekends they'd had. They all had their own personal baggage with them. And I had them go through the laughing exercise. And for those who don't know what it is, it's a very simple exercise. You get your students to close your eyes, put their head down their head if they're comfortable with it, and you get them to start off just smiling to themselves. And of course, they're wearing masks, so it's really funny because you can see some people trying to smile, but it hasn't reached their eyes. And so they try to smile, and then they go to a small giggle, and then they go to more of a belly laugh, and then they laugh like a hyena, and then you bring it all the way down. So from the hyena to the belly laugh to the giggling to the smile. And the change in atmosphere in that class was astounding. It was so fun to watch them realize that I can fake it until I make it. And then once they were feeling better, it was amazing. The whole class began to discuss a lot more things. They were much more interactive. And it's a really quick 5-minute exercise, which I highly recommend whenever you have someone in your sessions as social workers with families, with youth. Try it sometime because it's really neat how it works. People who kept track of their gratitude once a week were more upbeat and had fewer physical complaints than others. And I'm sure many of you do this already. I'm not an expert in this area. I'm like you. I'm trial and error. I try these things. So in my counseling sessions that I do, I'm also a trained counselor. And in my counseling sessions that I do, I always start off with 3 things that you're grateful for. And as soon as I do that, it changes the tone of the session again, and so that we can have more positive conversations about the challenges they may be facing. Conversely, people who obsessively repeated the negative thoughts and behaviors were able to change their unhealthy patterns when they focused on positivity. And I know it sounds very floaty, very, very, very light and very artsy in some ways, but it is very, very true. If you focus on that positivity, it helps you through a lot of the negativity that you're feeling. And I'm not saying dismiss the negativity, but I'm saying feeling positive about what you have accomplished. And this is why one of my great slides I absolutely love. I don't care what people think of me. At least mosquitoes find me attractive. This is a simple cartoon, but there is some truth in this. And this goes back to that wonderful, positive, laughing mindfulness exercise that we did. This is just another slide to show you the effects of mental health crisis, because we are indeed in a mental health crisis. And I use that term, and I use it strongly, and I use it over and over again, because unless we get the mental health of our colleagues, our students, our youth under control, it is going to be very, very difficult in the years to come for them and for everybody else. I'm using this slide, I'm sure some of you have seen this slide as well, to talk about the effects of poor mental health again. In this particular slide, what we see someone running from a mammoth. This is the type of anxiety, the type of reaction that we would have if we're extremely nervous, extremely scared, etc., etc., etc. This is what affects our system. This is what makes us be panicky. This is what makes us run. I see a bear, I run. Unfortunately, what our kids are feeling now is they're still having the same reactions, but it's a different stimuli. And I often use the triune brain model. I don't know if you can see this. The triune brain model, where we have the 3 parts of our brain, and this is our thinking part, and this is our instinctive part. And what happens when they're in this high state of poor mental health, high emotional state, is their instinctive part takes over, so that the rational part can't think. And I use the example of a bear. If I see a bear, I know I'm supposed to stay still. I know I'm supposed to make myself big. I know what I'm supposed to do. If I see a bear, I'm running. My instincts have taken over. And this is what happens when these young people have these extreme mental health moments, these poor mental health moments. Their instinct takes over, and they resort to what they know, what has worked in the past, and it might be a form of flight, fight, or freezing, but it's the same reaction, but a different stimuli. And it's really important to know that, so that we don't discount how they're actually feeling. Elementary youth are no different. When they're trying to get control of the situation, they're fighting. If they're actually acting out, it's a fight response. If they're being non-compliant, it's a flight response. They're avoiding. Avoidance is a flight rather than a fight. When they shut down and they don't do anything, that is actually a freeze. And I kind of consider flight and freeze very similar in a lot of ways, but it is a freeze response. And the last one, when they run away, it's obviously a flight response. These responses are because their instinct are kicking in, and the rational thought is no longer there. This is also why when you see an elementary student in the middle of an emotional release, to try to talk to them and ask them what's wrong, how can I help you calm down? That's not going to help, because they're right here, and they're going to fight, they're going to flight, they're going to do everything they can, because their thinking part is not working. Their instinctive part has taken over. And until we can get them to relax and use their thinking part, we're not going to be able to help them solve everything. And this is key with kids. And I have seen it time and time again. The number of times I've had to try to keep a child from hurting themselves or others, you wouldn't believe the numbers that I have done. I've had kids bite me, kick me, do anything because they're trying to run away, because they're trying to fight what they're doing. And it's all instinctive. And at the end of it, they feel so bad that the shame factor kicks in, which is a whole other presentation. So when someone's mental health is poor, they are unable to control their reactions to start off with, which is why we're in the problem we're in with a lot of these youth. And of course, we know that young adults with significant mental disorders come from young children with significant mental disorders. It doesn't go away. You can't just say they'll grow out of it. What they may grow out of is the desire to change, the desire to do things more socially acceptable. It may change in the fact that they just don't tell you what they're feeling anymore. But it is a fact that young children with significant mental health disorder leads to young adults. And then it becomes a whole other issue and the law becomes involved. So now let's talk about you guys. I know a lot of you are social workers, and I'll be honest, I'm not a social worker. And I'm coming at this from an education perspective, and I'm coming at it from a counseling perspective. But as I went through the standards of practices for your Nova Scotia College of Social Workers here, one of the big things that you do is promote the protection of public and specifically of clients. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about poor mental health and trying to find ways to help poor mental health. It's that protection of the public and specifically of clients. And again, from my position within an elementary school, well, it's actually a middle school, but it's an elementary to middle school. But that protection of the public becomes key because when you have the young kids coming around, running around, doing extremely aggressive behaviors, the protection becomes paramount. And the best way to protect is to educate and to help the person who is doing the problems, which is where this comes in. Again, for the purpose of this act, this is from the Social Workers Act. I did a little research on this stuff. The practice of social work is the assessment, remediation, and prevention of social problems. Good luck, guys. That is a huge, huge mandate. When I saw this, I was like, wow, that could prevent social problems. Fantastic. It is something that is your mandate and that you aim for. But we know that this prevention of social problems is so much broader than just the social issues that we see on a daily basis. These young kids that are having the poor mental health issues are the epitome of social problems. And they've learned it generally within their home or something that's happened to them and they've learned it. And it's breaking the cycle of them learning it, breaking the cycle and teaching them there's another way to help them through these challenges rather than just their instinctive part, which is generally running, hitting, biting. And it's trying to change their whole social makeup from what they know and showing them that something else works. So when I was looking up social work, it is actually assessment, remediation, and prevention of social problems. Fantastic. But what does it do? It is supposed to, and I'm sure it does, enhances the social functioning of individuals, families, groups, and communities. To me, I love that they're bulleted, and I love this mandate, by the way. I was really impressed with this. And they're bulleted, but to me, you can't help one without the other. You can't help an individual without helping the group, the community, and the family. If you're to take an isolated child from a house and teach it what to do in isolation and show it how to respond in isolation, and then when they go back to the family and the individual, it's not going to work as well because the family hasn't been educated about it and the groups haven't been educated about it. So our whole task as a community in social work becomes helping the entire community. Big, big mandate. And again, from what I've read, what you do is you do direct counseling, you do development of programs, promotion, delivery of human services, social policies, development, promotion. That is fantastic. What I'm going to talk about that works the best from my own perspective is the direct counseling stuff. And we're going to get to some of the strategies that I use with some of my kids very shortly. Of course, to do this, you have to have your social work, you have to have the knowledge behind it, you have to have your own very clear sense of values, and you have to have the skills to do it. Without a clear understanding of how mental health affects youth, we are unable to do our jobs. And I say we, being counselors, being teachers, being social workers. And this was another really great little comic that I found. It's not his fault he's a little aggressive. He's got SMBD, spuriously medicalized behavior disorder. And I use that because there are so many diagnoses coming out. There's so many letters that kids are being labeled with that sometimes you can't help but wonder, is it too many? And I myself think sometimes it is. We do know there is a case of overdiagnoses. We do know that there's cases for people being medicated when they don't need to be. But that doesn't change the underlying behaviors that they're having and the mental health that they're having. So whether, and I get a lot of this from teachers, whether we believe the diagnosis is correct or not is irrelevant. If we see the challenge, we still have to try to help them with their mental health challenges, regardless of any diagnosis. And I'm sure you guys see that in your work as well. If we were live, I would do a brainstorm. Unfortunately, we can't do it in this forum, but you may just want to go through in your mind some causes that you think that may lead to poor mental health in youth. I'm going to continue on with this, but think about that too, because that is very important. So why are we seeing this undesirable behavior in youth? These are taken from some research that I've done and some from some papers that have been done and my own experience. I think we're seeing a lot more undesirable behavior in youth because of the learning environments that they're in right now. We are really giving them a lot of information. The learning environment may not be conducive for everyone. Someone who has been diagnosed with ADHD or someone who has been diagnosed with ASD, they cannot participate in the class the way that's expected of them most of the time. It's too much for them. So the learning environment itself may be causing some of the problems. I also believe that there's too much information for their development level. Right now, we are in a knowledge age. Anything we want to know, we can Google online. Simple. We just ask it and we find it. But younger and younger kids are having iPads, are having phones, are having access to TV shows, you just, I won't go into that yet. There's an overload of information for these kids. And it's not that it's bad. It's that their brain may not be at the developmental level to handle it. There's too much higher level thinking involved in the information that is being presented to them. If you take a look back to last week in the election, there was so much information being thrown at so many people. And if you think that the younger kids weren't watching that, I'm sorry to say you are mistaken. They were watching it, they were taking it in, and they had no idea how to process it. I don't know how to process it. I'm a 51-year-old woman. I have multiple degrees. I am a trained counselor. I don't know how to process the information I was given. Yet we are having our kids younger and younger be aware of this information. They don't know what to think of it. They don't know how to pronounce it. Another example is the COVID information that has gone around. COVID is a devastating disease, definitely. But right now, I strongly feel that our youth are being terrified. And this is very, very hard on them. It's hard on their poor mental health. It's hard on their mental health, and it's seen an increase of poor mental health. Another thing that I want to talk about a little bit is screen time. And before y'all roll your eyes and think, oh yes, we've all heard about this, I'm not entirely convinced that a lot of screen time is a bad thing. I think screen time should be developmentally appropriate. And from there, we're going to discuss it a little bit more. I also, again, you may not agree with this, but there is so much organized play now. Sports are organized. Dance is organized. Very few people go out to the ball field and just hit a ball. You have to be on a team. I believe that might be causing some of the mental health issues. There's a huge movement talking about how the kids aren't feeling connected, the relationship, which of course leads to the lack of relationship building skills. So they're used to getting the instant gratification. and instant results, and they do not always understand someone else's perspective because a lot of their time is not spent doing their own mediations, but having someone else come in and mediate for them. Those are my thoughts. But now we get to, what do we actually do about this? Well, one of the things that the Joint Consortium, I'm from BC, anyone who's in BC, love this paper, Joint Consortium. I think it's got some fantastic ideas in it. But they talk about some approaches to education, and they talk about what else we can do. But they also make some very key assumptions that I think we all have to make. And the first assumption is that children and youth have these inner strengths and gifts that do support their capacity to initiate, direct, and sustain positive life directions. And I'm going to read these, and I apologize for reading the slide, but I think it's really important that we understand this. This first assumption is that children can get through this. And I love that assumption. The second one is that child and youth engagement and empowerment are critical for figuring out what we do next. We have to make sure that the youth and the children can be engaged and that they have the power to make the decisions for themselves in some ways in order for us to facilitate the positive developments. Children's youth and social contexts provide important resources, which is why I go back to, I don't believe too much screen time is a bad thing. It's what they're watching that we have to be very, very, very careful of. Because to try to cut that out of someone's life, that is the social network now. And these influences have the capacity to contribute to and enhance their psychological well-being. And the fourth assumption is that children and youth social contexts and networks, children's and youth relationships with adults and peers contribute to psychological well-being. But these relationships have to be genuine. They have to be empathetic, they have to be unconditional caring, and they have to be an affirmation for the youth. An example of this one, I cannot tell you how important relationships are and how important the non-judging, unconditional caring counts. I had a young girl who was school refusal. She had many, many, many difficult times coming in. This was her fourth year dealing with it. Each year we'd come up with a different strategy that worked. This year nothing was working. So myself and my principal would go out to the car to meet her, and we would literally carry her in, where she would sit in my room to calm down, and then she'd go up to class. This particular time we carried her in, and she was in grade 3 at the time. She bit me, and she latched right, where's my hand? There we go. She latched right in between my thumb and my finger, and she ripped the skin off of me. What I did was the hardest thing I've ever did. First of all, pretend it didn't hurt. Second of all, talk to her about maybe hurting me wasn't the best thing. And when she calmed down, we were able to talk our way through this rationally. But the fact that I cared for her unconditionally and her bite didn't affect how much I cared for her was monumental in her coming to school after that. It was a phenomenal experience. So, these are, I can't see the bottom of my screen either. I apologize if I can move that up a bit. There we go. These are the indicators that these are how positive mental health can occur. When you have positive relationships, when you have positive self-esteem, when you have good problem solving and coping skills, solid family support, strong connectors to school, supportive teachers, engagement, and involvement in the faith and religious communities. That is actually taken from the suicide prevention page. And the problem is, what do we do when they don't have them? And this is where we're getting into our problem solving stage. Many of the things that I do, and I am not, as I said, I am not the be all end all. These are just things I have done to try to help my kids. I do use mindfulness practices. I use relationship development. I use play therapy and music therapy. I talk about the influence of the information highway. I do direct intervention. I do direct teaching of relationship building. And I put a later start to school, and that's a bit of my own hobby horse because we are asking our kids to go younger and younger. And for some kids, it is fantastic. For some kids, it doesn't work. I'm going to unpack these a little bit, and I know that we're running out of time. Let's get past this one. We're going to talk about mindfulness. And mindfulness is one of those things where it is just being about in the moment. And I find this so important because most of our mental health challenges are things that are happening in the future or things that have happened in the past. And where mindfulness practice is about the now, it sort of shows us that if we can be in the now, we're able to calm our mind. In other words, relax our thinking part so that we can get out and we can actually do more things to help us relieve our poor mental health, to find positive attributes for our poor mental health. It means paying attention to a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, non-judgmentally. And this is so key when you're talking to your students about this, that they understand that mindfulness or anything that you're doing is a non-judgmental aspect. There's the 3 skills: emotional regulation, attention control, and self-awareness, that are all cultivated by mindfulness. Okay, my thing isn't working anymore. Let's move this. Okay, for some reason my slides have stopped moving. All right, I don't know if my tech guy is still there, but my slides have stopped moving. Okay, I will continue to talk about this. In mindfulness, there are some really essential instructions when you're starting mindfulness. And that is, there's short moments of awareness. You have to find a neutral gear. When the attention is unavailable as a resource, you do have to use psychological tools, which basically means when you can't focus their attention, you use tools to help them focus their attention. I use fidgets all the time. I use music all of the time. I use movement all of the time. We soak in the positive thoughts. We help them to soak in the positive thoughts. And in this presentation, which you will all have access to, there are some mindfulness exercises, which I think will be very helpful to you. But I'm going to move on to the relationship development. Teacher-child relationships from primary to grade 2 has been linked to child well-being in various aspects of mental health. And I would like to say this actually comes from a quote from a book called, by Birch and Ladd. Anyway, I have all the stuff there. You can look at it later. The relationship development, if it works for P to 3, P to 2, I can guarantee that it works for P to whenever. This relationship building is key. And again, it has to be non-judgmental. It has to be genuine. And I foster this relationship, and I encourage my teachers to foster this relationships by doing the simple things like saying hi to the kids when they walk in the hallway, commenting on their sweater, nice sweater. It builds up a relationship, and that relationship is when they really come to trust you. According to Strain and Joseph, building positive relationships with young children is an essential task and a foundational component of good teaching. And as social workers, you do have that teaching role, because you're not only coming in to help the families. In order to help the families, you do have to teach them. But this relationship building does take time and a lot of patience. However, if the relationship is good, it's amazing what you can change and what you can help them with. Relationships can be key with individuals when trust is given freely, but not blindly, genuine feelings of interest and concern, clear expectations, leaving shame and judgment aside. And that is really hard to do because we all come with our own baggage and we all come with our own background. But when someone is telling us something, if we can listen without judgment, just to help them through it, through their poor mental health, it makes a significant impact. In other words, listening. The next aspect, if we could move my slides ahead, I would be talking about is something called motivational interviewing, which is actually restorative justice practice. And a motivational interviewing, you use the ORS practice. Basically, you ask open-ended questions, you have an affirmation of what they say, and you do reflective learning, and you do summarizing. No judgment, just repeating what they say. It's another extremely, extremely important aspect to creating a relationship. I have some pictures of resources in there for you to use with that aspect as well. The next thing I wanted to talk about was play therapy. And play therapy kind of has a bad name because a lot of people just look on it as kids playing. However, when you think about some of the families that you work with, some of those kids, regardless of their ages, may not have had an opportunity just to play. And when you think of all the social skills you learn when you're playing, even just sharing, even just, where does a cow go? Where does a horse go? Those silly little things that you play with figures, they haven't had a chance to learn them. And play therapy allows them to learn them. In addition, any of you who may be counselors out there know the value of just allowing the individuals to have free play, because you learn a lot about what's going on in their mind. I mean, everything from, I used to have a child that played in the sand. We had a little sandbox, and he would always bury this one figure, and he would push all the other figures aside, and they would be playing. And when we talked about that one figure, it represented his grandfather who had passed away many years ago. So that told me there was a lot of grief that had to be unpacked. But that play therapy was the key part of it. So play therapy allows you to process emotions. It allows a decrease in undesirable behaviors. It allows the development of independence and creative thinking. And when you think of any advancement that have been made in any field, it's that creative thinking that makes the advancements, and allowing them to know it's okay to have that creative thinking. Improvement of the social skills has come out of play therapy, and of course, stronger relationship with your family members. Now let's talk a little bit about the information highway. When I first started doing this presentation, I thought this would be a big part of it. It turns out when you Google, is information highway bad? Is there too much screen time being used? You get thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands articles that tell you, yes, it is bad. But when you Google, does screen time help a child to develop? You get just as many. And everything agrees that it's not necessarily the amount of time, but it's what you're doing and who you're doing it with and the type of information you're receiving. And this goes back to the young kids having so much information being handed to them that they don't know how to process it. And so when they get so many things, when you think about a game like GTA, Grand Theft Auto, that has such adult themes in it that a grade 7-year-old who's playing it, and yes, they do. But if the 7-year-old is playing with it, they don't understand the concepts behind it. They don't understand right and wrong. They don't have their values set. So a game like that does nothing but confuse the child. Even simple things like a newscast with a lot of violence on it, it confused them. When 9/11 happened, every child knew about it. However, adults were still having problems processing it, yet we're exposing the children to this. It's that type of information that's being shared that is the tough part, not necessarily the quantity, but the type. And again, if you're a parent with your child and you're walking them through the information, it has a total different effect. Okay. Of course, the next aspect to help some of these kids with poor mental health is the direct intervention. And there are specific programs that are available to help with emotional regulations, patients' anxiety, empathy, turn-taking, etc., etc. And again, I do have them all listed here. But that direct teaching is just as important, because although many of us learn many of our social skills almost through an osmosis process, we were playing with kids and we picked them up, a lot of kids with poor mental health, they are not able to do that appropriately. And therefore, they have to be taught it directly or they will never understand it. And again, this is all from my experience and my working with kids. I'm sure there's people out there that will disagree with me, and I'm sure there's people out there that are doing a much better job than I would ever do. But these are just some of the ideas that I've consolidated. I see I have just a little bit of time left. Yeah, there was a lot of really good slides in here, people. I'm sorry you can't see them, and hopefully we can get it so you can see the rest of them another time. But the basic take-home away from this is that mindfulness practices have a significant impact on younger minds. I have done mindfulness with primaries. I have done mindfulness with grade 12s. The impact on mindfulness activities is limited only by your comfortability with it and the exercises that you use. What I did with the younger kids is very different what I did with the older kids. With the younger kids, we did anyway, very different aspects. Play therapy and music therapy. Okay, you guys are seeing the slides. So I just got a message saying that you guys are seeing the slides. I am not seeing the slides, so I have no idea where we are in the slides at this point. I'm not sure. This is very interesting. Okay, look, I got, nope. Anyway, I'm going to go back to the direct takeaways. Play therapy, music therapy are huge. Direct teaching is huge. Direct teaching of relationship building is huge. The screen time, we talked about that. And motivational interviewing, I do highly recommend you look up motivational interviewing because it allows you to get to the challenges of the child with the mental health challenge without actually putting more trauma on them and having to repeat the things. And of course, relationship building is key. And that, I guess, is about it. And I'll bring it now to question time. If there are any questions. Sorry, and yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Davina. Can you hear me?
You're welcome. Yes.
That's great. We did see the slide, so there is hope for you that people have been following along while you spoke. But I appreciate all that you've said just now in terms of the children in relation to their life ahead and what the current situations are for them. One of the questions that came up throughout your presentation had to do with the effect of violence in the family home and how that seems to be showing itself at school, and whether or not you've had lots of exposure or experience with the effect on the mental health of the children in the home that has violence happening.
Yes. Whenever I live in an area that might be considered impoverished in some ways, and the violence that is inherent in some of these kids' homes are absolutely phenomenal. What they have seen is more than I could ever see in my lifetime, and it does have a significant effect. However, there are also some great ways to address these kids when they come and they are so angry. Is usually the anger, the emotion that comes out because they don't understand the aggression. When you have a relationship with them, you're actually teaching them what a relationship should look like. Am I saying it saves everybody? No, of course it doesn't. But it gives them an alternative to consider. And as they get older, they reflect on it. And I can say as they get older, because I did have this one young gentleman. I taught him when it was in junior high way back when. And he was extremely violent. And he came up to me about 10, 15 years later. And he said, Miss Melanson, I get what you were saying. And as my mother, God love her, as my mother always used to say, if you only reach one, then that's one more than you haven't reached. So I reached him in some way, and it does help in the long run, but it is a long process.
Okay, thank you. Please continue to type in your questions if you may have some. I'm really impressed with the ability to recognize the interconnection of all things from the child's perspective, from your perspective as a behavioral interventionist. Do you find that you have a lot of support in the context of your place of employment to reach out and effectively, starting with the children, helping them? Does it actually spread out and become something that you can do beyond the school classroom or beyond that individual child?
A lot of questions there. The first, I do have a lot of support, and I find that we have a lot of support here. However, the support can only go so far as the families are willing. And what we do find is a lot of the families of a lot of these behavior kids have almost already given up on them, which is, again, why the relationship becomes so important, because if they've already written them off, they need someone who believes in them regardless of what they do or how they do it. I've been in meetings when the child is there and the mother says things like, yeah, they're just a bad kid. And hearing that from your mother at that young age is devastating. So our efforts, they are getting done in the school, and the school-wide is spreading, and everyone's aware of that. And I've actually seen kids progress from primary to 7 to become extremely well-adjusted youth. But the community and the families, you have to convince them. You really have to convince them that that's the way. And sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't. And that's part of what you kind of have to agree with, which leads me to something which I didn't have a chance to talk about, is self-care. Really, it's so very important for any caregiver, a social worker, a teacher, an educator of any kind. That self-care aspect is so important. So I really encourage you to look after that yourself too.
Thank you. In addition, are you able to rhyme off the top of your head some wonderful resources? There were some sharing in the chat room of actual links to different places, but perhaps you have some favorites of your own that you could speak to?
I do. I have to say I do love zones. I use it all the time, zones of regulation. I'm dealing with a couple different social emotional learning programs right now. One is through the SSIS, and it has an assessment in it, and I can get that link. That's not included because it was a fairly new one. I also, for younger children, I do use Social Detective is one of them. I use, oh my gosh, I forget the name of it. It's in my slide, really it is, which is not up there and I can't see it, but there are a bunch of them in there. One really quick one is called Should I, Shouldn't I? They're 2 games. They're for elementary or for middle school, and it gives situations that you actually are very conversational. You turn out to have great conversations with them. There's another wonderful social program for younger kids called We Thinkers. And this one has 4 or 5 storybooks, and you set up different resources for it, and it leads your elementary school youth through appropriate social decision making and what other people might be thinking when they make different social differences. It does a lot of perspective taking. Another one is Unstuck and on Target, which is a great one. A great resource for autistic students is Peers. I've taught that, and I've trained teachers on that, and oh my gosh, following through that is a dream. It's so easy. So those are just a few of them.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Have you noticed a change in the school system that makes more room for more interventions from your in your role, that you have more access?
To be honest, no, not really. We have more specialists. We have more people at higher levels that can give us guidance. But what we need is, as with anybody in this type of job, you need more time. You need more time to build the relationships, and you need more time to access the students. But with the increase of behaviors in students, the time becomes less as opposed to more. And it does take a toll on it. Last year, I had a caseload of 33 kids. 15 of them were considered high flyers, and that would be about 10 of those would be running on a daily basis or getting into a fight on a daily basis or needed direct intervention on a daily basis. And that's not a good, healthy way to go.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you have become an expert in your own self-care, I take it.
I have, and that's why I'm preaching it now. Do not be afraid to take your own self-care. It is imperative. If you fall, they have nobody. Really.
Yeah. Thank you. So I appreciate that your perspective continues to be in support of the interrelationship of children in a context, which is very key to the social work viewpoint and perspective. In addition, it also sounds like you were giving great support to the idea of prevention, that what we have in little children and their struggle becomes really significant as they mature and grow older to be young teens and also adults, which is a constant struggle for those who care about the well-being of the community and vis-a-vis the province, the country. That we put some energy into making sure people have what they need to evolve into being full, well-rounded individuals who
I do maintain that no child acts out because they want to. There's always a reason for it. And punitive responses are great in the moment, but we have to find out why they're doing it in order to teach them not to do it. And I'm also restorative justice facilitator, and I think that perspective comes from there because it is so very important for them to understand their effect of their behaviors on others as well, which leads to them understanding why they shouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm. And it would all be supported really well if all the social determinants of health were looked after, and services
It
like
would
yours
be.
were expanded a little larger. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I'll be very honest, and please forgive me, but I would love to see the branches of justice, social, community services, and education actually kind of get together and figure out where can we best put our resources, because right now I do feel there is a lot of duplication of work, which again goes directly to the time that people are spending on it. And I think that there has to be a whole reconfiguration of it all, to be quite honest, to help
Well,
out
on that
everybody,
note, I
really.
guess promoting collaboration in terms of interrelationship is never a theme that social workers shy away from. So we appreciate this in terms of our time now, and thank you so much for having been a part of this and sharing what your experiences have been. Thank you so much. I'm
Okay,
just going to
well,
go.
thank you very much. Thank
I'll
you for
just
having me.
add I'll add one more thing to the audience at large, which is to remind you that you can access the slide deck, which you can go through at your own leisure, as well as your certificate of attendance through one of the widgets on the bottom of your screen. And you will also be able to watch this webinar in 24 hours after it's placed in the on-demand section of the website for the CASW. So thanks very much. It's been a pleasure, and be well, all of you. Goodbye.